Today I am continuing to read from The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. The Myth Maker. On the benches of the Paris school where I wore out my first pair of jeans, I made friends with a skinny red-faced boy named Olivier, whose runaway mythomania made his company irresistible. With him around, there was no need to go to the movies. Olivier's friends had the best seats in the house, and the film was a miracle of invention. On Monday, he would amaze us with a weekend saga straight out of the Thousand and One Nights. If he had not spent Sunday with Johnny Halliday, it was because he had gone to London to see the new James Bond, unless he had been driving the latest Honda. Japanese motorbikes just then arriving in France were all the rage in schoolyard discussions. From morning to night, our friend fed us small lies and gross fabrications, brazenly inventing new stories even when they contradicted preceding ones. An orphan at 10 a.m., an only son at noon, he could dig up four sisters by mid-afternoon. One of them a figure skating champion, as for his father, in reality a sober civil servant, he became, depending on the day, the inventor of the atom bomb, the Beatles' manager, or General de Gaulle's unacknowledged son. Since Olivier himself neglected to give coherence to the dishes he served up, we would have been the last to expect consistency of him. When he came out with some utterly outlandish fable, we would voice tentative doubts, but he defended his good faith with such indignant protests of I swear that we would swiftly back down. When I last checked, Olivier was neither a fighter pilot, nor a secret agent, nor an advisor to an emir, careers he once considered. Fairly predictably, it is in the advertising world that he wields his inexhaustible faculty for gliding every lily. I should not feel morally superior to Olivier, for today I envy him his mastery of the storyteller's art. I am not sure I will ever acquire such a gift, although I too am beginning to forge glorious substitute destinies for myself. I am occasionally a Formula One driver, and you have certainly seen me burning up the track at Monza or Silverstone. That mysterious white racer without a brand name, number, and advertising slogans is me. Stretched out on my bed, I mean in my cockpit, I hurl myself into the corners, my head weighed down by my helmet, wrenched painfully sideways by a gravitational pull. I have also been cast as a soldier in a TV series on history's great battles. I have fought alongside Vercingetorix against Caesar, turned back on the invading Arabs at Poitiers, helped Napoleon to victory, and survived Verdun. Since I have just been wounded in the D-Day landings, I cannot swear that I will join the airdrop into Dien Bien Phu. Under the physiotherapist's gaze, I am a Tour de France long shot on the verge of pulling off a famous victory. Success soothes my aching muscles. I am a phenomenal downhill skier. I can still hear the roar of the crowd on the slope and the singing of the wind in my ears. I was miles ahead of the favorites, I swear. A day in the life. Here we come to the end of the road, the disastrous Friday, 8 December 1995. Ever since beginning this book, I have intended to describe my last moments as a perfectly functioning earthling. But I have put it off so long that now on the brink of this bungee jump into my past, I feel suddenly dizzy. How can I begin to recall those long, futile hours, as elusive as drops of mercury from a broken thermometer? How can I describe walking for the last time, heedless, perhaps a little grumpy, beside the little warm body of a tall, dark-haired girl? Everything that day was grey, muted, resigned, the sky, the people, the city, collective nerves on edge after several days of a transport strike. Like millions of Parisians, our eyes empty and our complexions dull. Florence and I embarked like zombies on a new day of punishment amid the indescribable chaos caused by the strike. I mechanically carried out all those simple acts which today seem miraculous to me: shaving, dressing, downing a hot chocolate. Weeks earlier, I had chosen this day to test the latest model of a German car. The importer had put a car and driver at my disposal for the whole day. At the appointed hour, a businesslike young man was waiting outside, leaning against a gunmetal grey BMW. Through the apartment window, I eyed the big sedan, solid and sleek. I wondered how my old Levi's jacket would look in so sophisticated a vehicle. I pressed my forehead against the window pane to gauge the temperature outside. Florence softly stroked the nape of my neck. Our farewells were brief, our lips scarcely brushing together. I am already running down stairs that smell of floor polish. It'll be the last of the smells of my past. I read the news today. Oh boy. Between crisis-fraught traffic reports, the radio plays a Beatles song, A Day in the Life. Crossing the Bois de Boulogne, the BMW glides like a flying carpet. A private world of luxury and comfort. My driver is pleasant. I tell him of my plans for the afternoon to pick up my son from his mother's place 25 miles outside Paris and bring him back to the city in early evening. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. Theophil and I have not had a heart-to-heart, a man-to-man exchange since I moved out of the family home in July. I plan to take him to the theatre to see the new Philippe Arias play, then to eat oysters at a restaurant on Place Clichy. It's all set. We are spending the weekend together. I only hope the strike will not frustrate our plans. I'd love to turn you on. I love the arrangement of this number, in which the whole band reaches a crescendo and holds it until the explosion of the final note. Like a piano crashing down 7 floors, we arrived at Les Valois. The BMW stops outside my office. I arrange to meet the driver at 3 p.m. There is only one message on my desk, but what a message. I have to put in an immediate return call to Simone Veil, former Minister of Health, formerly the most popular woman in France, tenured for life at the top spot in the magazine's imaginary roll of honor. Since this kind of call is rare, I first ask around to find what we might have said or done to provoke this quasi-divine personality. I think she is unhappy with her photo in our last issue. My assistant tactfully suggests I scrim through the issue and reach the offending photo, a montage which ridicules rather than glorifies our idol. It is one of the mysteries of our trade. You work for weeks on a subject, it goes back and forth among the most skillful pairs of hands, and no one spots the glaring blunder that a neophyte would spot in a second. I am pitched into an authentic long-distance tornado. She is convinced that the magazine has been plotting against her for years. So I have the greatest difficulty persuading her that, on the contrary, she is a cult figure at LA. Normally such damage control is the job of production chief Anne-Marie, who handles all celebrities with kid gloves. Whereas as a diplomat, I am more akin to Tintin's friend Captain Haddock than to Henry Kissinger. When we hang up after a 3/4 hour exchange, I feel exactly like a trampled doormat. Although the editorial staff likes to dismiss our chief's luncheons as rather a bore, they wouldn't miss them for anything in the world. Our boss, known variously to his supporters as Geronimo, Louis XI, and the Ayatollah, regularly hosts luncheons in order to take stock, as he puts it. It is here on the top floor of the magazine, in the biggest executive dining room, that our Generalissimo offers his subjects clues about where they stand in his affections. His remarks range from praise couched in velvet tones to the most lacerating of rebukes, and he possesses a whole repertoire of gestures, scowls, and bread scratchings, which over the years we have learned to decipher. Of that final meal, I remember very little, except that the condemned man's last drink was water. I think the main course was beef. Perhaps we all caught mad cow disease, which nobody at the time talked about. Since it incubates for 15 years, we still have time left. The only death expected that day was President Mitterrand's. The whole of Paris had been hanging on his medical reports, wondering whether he would last the weekend. As it turned out, he had another whole month to live. The worst thing about these lunches is that they go on forever. To save time, I sneaked out through my office without saying goodbye to anyone. By the time I met my driver, evening was already falling on the glass facades. It was well past 4. "We're going to be caught in this mess, sir. I'm truly sorry. It's you I'm thinking about, sir." For a second I feel like chucking the whole thing, cancelling the theatre, postponing my weekend with Theophile, retreating to my bed with a plate of cream cheese and the crossword puzzle. I decide to fight this sense of utter exhaustion that has come over to me. "We'll just have to avoid the autoroute, whatever you think." Despite its power, the BMW bogs down in the traffic milling on the Pont de Suresnes. We drive past the St. Cloud racecourse and then the Raymond Poincaré Hospital at Garches. I cannot pass this spot without recalling a sinister childhood episode. When I was at the Lycée Condorcet, a gym teacher used to take us to the Marche Stadium at Vaucresson for outdoor sports of the kind I detested. One day our bus ran smack into a man who had dashed out of the hospital without looking where he was going. There was a strange noise, the sound of bricks, and the man died instantly, leaving a bloody streak along the bus windows. It was a winter afternoon, like today. By the time the police finished asking questions, it was evening. A different driver took us back to Paris. At the rear of the bus they were singing Penny Lane in shaky voices. Still the Beatles. What songs will Theophile remember when he is 44? After an hour and a half of driving, we reach our goal, the house where I spent 10 years of my life. Fog hangs over the garden which once rang with so many yells and so much helpless, happy laughter. Theophile is waiting for us at the gate, sitting on his backpack, ready for the weekend. I would have liked to phone Florence, my new girlfriend, but it is Friday and she is at her parents' place for the Sabbath. I shall try to speak to her after the play. Only once have I participated in that Jewish ritual, here at Mountainville, in the house of the old Tunisian doctor who brought my children into the world. From this point onward, everything becomes blurred. Nevertheless, I get behind the wheel of the BMW, focusing on the orange-tinted dashboard lights. I am functioning in slow motion, and in the beam of the headlights, I barely recognize turns I have negotiated several thousand times. I feel sweat beading my forehead, and when I overtake a car, I see it double. At the first junction, I pull over. I stagger from the BMW, almost unable to stand upright, and collapse on the rear seat. I have one idea in my head: to get back to the village and to the home of my sister-in-law, Diane, a nurse. Half conscious, I ask Theophile to turn and get her as soon as we reach her house. A few seconds later, Diane is there. Her decision is swift. We have to get to the clinic as quickly as we can. It is 10 miles away. This time the driver tears off Grand Prix style. I feel extremely strange, as if I had swallowed an LSD tablet, and I reflect that I am too old for such fantasies. Not for a second does it occur to me that I may be dying. On the road to Mantes, the BMW purrs along at top speed, and we observe a long line of cars honking insistently to force our way through. I try to say something like, "Slow down, I'll get better. It's not worth risking an accident," but no sound comes from my mouth, and my head, no longer under my control, wobbles on my neck. The Beatles and their song of the morning come back into my memory, and though the news was rather sad, well, I just had to laugh. I saw the photograph. In no time we are at the clinic. People are running about frantically. I am transferred, limp and sprawling, into a wheelchair. The BMW's doors click softly shut. Someone once told me that you can tell a good car by the quality of that click. I am dazzled by the neon lighting in the corridor. In the elevator, strangers heap encouragement upon me, and the Beatles launch into the finale of A Day in the Life. The piano crashing down from the 7th floor. Before it hits the ground, I have time for one last thought. We'll have to cancel the play. In any case, we would have got there late. We'll go tomorrow night. Where could Theophile have got to? And I sink into a coma. Season of renewal. Summer is nearly over. The nights grow chilly. And once again I'm struggled beneath thick blue blanket stamped Paris hospitals. Each day brings its assortment of familiar faces: linen maid, dentist, postman, a nurse who has just had a grandson, Thomas, and the man who last June broke his finger on a bed rail. I rediscover old landmarks, old habits, and this, the start of my first autumn season at the hospital, has made one thing very plain. I have indeed begun a new life, and that life is here. In this bed, that wheelchair, and those corridors, nowhere else. September means the end of holidays, it means back to school and to work, and here at the hospital it's time to start a new season. I have made some progress. I can now grunt the little song about the kangaroo, musical testimonial to my progress in speech therapy. The kangaroo escaped the zoo. Goodbye, zoo, cried kangaroo. Cleared the wall with one clean jump, leaped across with a great big thump. But here at the Burke, I hear only the faintest echoes of the outside world, collective return to work and responsibility. Its return to the world of literature and journalism and school, to the work-a-day world of Paris. I shall hear more about it soon, when my friends start journeying back to Burke with their summer's worth of news. It seems that Theophil now goes around in sneakers whose heels light up every time he takes a step. You can follow him in the dark. Meanwhile, I am savoring this last week of August with a heart that is almost light, because for the first time in a long while I don't have that awful sense of a countdown, the feeling triggered at the beginning of a holiday that inevitably spoils a good part of it. Her elbows on the small mobile formica table that serves as her desk, Claude is reading out these pages we have patiently extracted from the void every afternoon for the past 2 months. Some pages I am pleased to see again, others are disappointing. Do they add up to a book? As I listen to Claude, I study her dark hair, her very pale cheeks which sun and wind have scarcely touched with pink, the long bluish veins on her hands, and her things scattered about the room. I will put them in my mind's scrapbook as reminders of a summer of hard work. The big blue notebook whose pages she fills with her neat, formal handwriting, the pencil case like the ones schoolchildren use, full of spare ballpoints, the heap of paper napkins ready for my worst coughing and spitting fits, and the red raffia purse in which she periodically rummages for coins for the coffee machine. Her purse is half open, and I see a hotel room key, a metro ticket, and a 100-franc note folded in 4, like objects brought back by a space probe sent to Earth to study how Earthlings live and travel and trade with one another. The sight leaves me pensive and confused. Does the cosmos contain keys for opening up my cocoon? A metro line with no terminus, a currency strong enough to buy me freedom back? We must keep looking. I'll be off now. Now I'll read The Obituary of John Dominic Bobby by James Kirkup, Independent, 12 March 1997. A voice reaches us, crying out from the depths of a profound silence. I am alive, I can think, and no one has the right to deny me these two realities. The words were conveyed by a flicker of the left eyelid and come from a truly extraordinary book, The Deep-Sea Diver and the Butterfly, by a former journalist, John Dominic Bobby. He worked for journals like Quotidien de Paris and Paris Match, and for 4 years until December 1995 was the very successful chief editor of LA. Then the unthinkable happened. A cardiovascular accident paralyzed him and sent him into deep coma, from which he emerged 20 days later in the Hospital Maritime at Burke. On the northeast coast of France, his brain intact, but able only to blink his left eyelid, he was diagnosed as suffering from the rare disease called locked-in syndrome. Unable to breathe, swallow, or to eat without assistance, in this inert body, the brain was working furiously, with a mixture of rage, exasperation, and wild humor, trying to make people understand what he was thinking, with the help of a specialized nurse, Claude Mandible, dispatched by the publisher Robert Laffont, he was able to write his book, using only his ability to blink at the most frequently used letters of the alphabet, ESARINT, and so on. While Mandible pointed to them on a screen, one blink for yes and two blinks for no. He would spend most of the night editing his thoughts and composing sentences, which he memorized so that when Mandible arrived in the morning, he could dictate the latest installment to her in a succession of blinks. The man's courageous spirit and the passionate tracking of a good story were combined in this supreme journalistic effort to produce a book whose vivid title describes the immobile state of his body, the deep-sea diver in one of those heavy old-fashioned diving suits, and the state of his mind, fluttering like a rare butterfly from the letter to letter, from word to word, page to page, to the end of the book of just over 100 pages. One would expect from this process a stiff factual report, but that is not the case. The book reads in flowing images that illuminate his predicament and enlighten our own darkness in the face of this mystery. The style is clear and fresh and not without elegance, imagination and shafts of humor. One of the beauties of this book is the portrait that emerges of the attentive speech therapist who does her best to teach him to relearn letters and syllables. There are bleak pictures of wintry beach at Burke Lake, a melancholy symbol of his own sense of desertation in his hypersensitive condition. Each sound becomes unbearable, meaningless noise, and when his two children come to visit him, their capers have to be endured with saintly patience. He is also in search of pastime, of memory itself, of the books he has read. The poems he learned by heart. Even more sad, he thinks of all the books he wanted to read and hadn't done so. He has to listen to someone else reading them to him. He remembers a bet he lost at the racetrack, one of the many flashes of wry humor in his book. Above all, he remembers his life as a journalist, as an editor, with its agonies and disappointments, his sense of being exploited by the media, yet his desire, in his post as editor of LA, to do something for the rights of women, to help them free themselves from various tyrannies. All this is admirably conveyed in a documentary about Bobby's last year, made with scrupulously rare and great sensitivity by George Aquez Benick, already programmed before his death to be shown on the weekly literary television program Bouillon de Culture, directed by Bernard Pivot. Guests are journalist friends of Bobby, the film director himself, the doctor and his assistants Mandible at Burke. Bainey's title is significant and ironic. Assigne a residence, house arrest. He says Bobby became a real actor, eager to make the film work perfectly. Bobby's determination to overcome difficulties that would send most of us into irretrievable depths of despair are expressed in the words, "I have decided to carry on my fight against fatality by setting up the first association in the world for people suffering from locked-in syndrome." So he created ALIS, Association to Locked-in Syndrome, and became its first president, stating his objective thus: to collect all the present information about the syndrome, to allow sufferers to communicate better with one another, to create means of breaking the solitude and isolation, and to make them true citizens of the 21st century. Already many famous people have become sponsors. The address of ALIS is 225 Boulevard de Genres, MBE 182 92100, Boulogne-Billancourt, France. Room 119, Naval Hospital, Berck-de-Sur-Mer, by Sarah O'Reilly. After the stroke that ended John Dominic Bobby's career as editor of LA Magazine on 8 December 1995, he confessed to weeping as his ambulance passed his former offices. Yet ironically, the memoir that emerged from his devastating stroke was greeted warmly by the critics. Bobby, the enthused, had never written better than after he was silenced. Renowned as a gregarious and charming bon vivant, after the seizure, he was forced to rely on what he described as a hit parade of letters to communicate. And once able to talk, he began to send out missives from his bed in room 119 of the Naval Hospital to friends updates of his progress that he called samizdat, a Russian word that referred to the practice of disseminating clandestine government-suppressed literature in Soviet bloc countries. Bobby's samizdat were illicit in another sense. They were fugitive pieces, thoughts that saw the light of the day despite overwhelming odds. When blessed silence returns, Bobby wrote, I can listen to the butterflies that flutter inside my head. To hear them, one must be calm and pay close attention, for their wing beats are barely audible. Loud breathing is enough to drown them out. This is astonishing. My hearing does not improve, yet I hear them better and better. Before his seizure, Bobby had been under contract to write a completely different book for his publishers. But in his wake, he found an alternative theme, a book made up of short chapters, a memoir of life and death. Claude Mandible was the freelance editor hired by Editions Robert Laffront Fixot to painstakingly translate the flicker of Bobby's eyelid into words and the fruit of his imagination onto the page. The work of transcribing the book took place over the summer and consisted of 2 months of writing and 2 weeks of editing. At the same time, a film was made by the celebrated French director Jean-Jacques Benix, which showed Bobby in his hospital room where he had been confined these past 6 months like a hermit crab dug into his rock. It was the same room he had woken up in after his stroke. When I finally surfaced, I was in room 119 of the Naval Hospital at Berck-sur-Mer. On the French Channel coast, the same room 119, infused now with the first light of day, from which I write. Bobby was not the first to write about the hospital on the area. Sylvia Plath had visited Berck-sur-Mer in June 1961 with her husband Ted Hughes, who noted in an appendage to Plath's Berck page, a poem that drew on this visit the existence of a sort of a hospital or convalescence home for the disabled fronting the beach. It was one of her nightmares stepped into the real world. In his own book, Bobby would recall the other broken-winged birds, voiceless parrots, ravens of doom that peopled the rooms and corridors of the hospital. In Jean-Jacques Benix's film, the process of creation was illuminated, with shots of Claude Mandible repeating the pair's special alphabet while watching Bobby's left eye for a reaction. With the flutter of a single eyelid, he witnessed the moment when my diving bell becomes less oppressive and my mind takes flight like a butterfly. There is so much to do. You can wander off in space or in time, set out for Tierra del Fuego or for King Midas's court. He movingly captures the power of imagination in this way. You can visit the woman you love, slide down beside her and stroke her still sleeping face. You can build castles in Spain, steal the golden fleece, discover Atlantis, realize your childhood dreams and adult ambitions. On 7th March 1997, Les Scaphandres et le Papillon was published in France. 2 days later, John Dominic Bobby died of heart failure at the age of 44.